Hello there, my name is Laurie and welcome to my channel, Old Dirty History, where I like to talk about whatever historic person, place, event, thing that I want to talk about. And today I would like to talk about the relationship between Queen Elizabeth I and her one true love, Robert Dudley. And if you're not familiar with who Elizabeth I was, she was a 16th century queen who was the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. And if you haven't checked out my Henry VIII series, definitely check it out. It might be a little long. I admit that. It's an 8-part series. I don't know what I was thinking when I decided to make that series, but I enjoyed it nonetheless, and I think you will too. Definitely check that out. I'll include it in the description below. And Robert Dudley was a courtier of Elizabeth's, who she grew up with in her childhood and she fell in love with. But unfortunately, he had a bit of a checkered past because of his family. And so today I want to dive into that relationship. But before I start, I just want to give my little disclaimer. I'm not a history expert, not trying to pretend to be one. I'm just a student and a lover of history. And so if I say anything inaccurate or dated, definitely feel free to leave a comment. Or if you just want to show some love, leave a comment. I read all the comments. I love them. So, and thank you so much to all of the people who recently decided to follow my page. I really do appreciate it. And I appreciate all of your wonderful comments, especially in the Goebbels video. That meant so much to me. Thank you so much. All right, so let's get started on Elizabeth I and Robert Dudley. Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, was born on June 24th in 1532 to John Dudley, the 1st Duke of Northumberland, and Jane Guilford, the Duchess of Northumberland. And Robert was one of 12 children, which just blows my mind. I can't even begin to imagine pushing out 12 kids during a period where OBGYN was not a thing, where there was a good chance that you could die from giving childbirth. I've always said that I would have been a nun had I been born during this period. No sex needed. I will just live my life for God. End of story. But his mother had 12 children. And Robert's family, the Dudleys, they had a really tough time living under the Tudors. For starters, his grandpappy, Edmund, was executed in 1509 for extortion under Henry VII's rule, who was Elizabeth's grandfather. And then his father, John, he rose to power underneath Elizabeth's little brother's reign, Edward VI. But then shit hit the fan for his father when Edward died at just 15 years old. During Elizabeth's father's reign, Henry VIII, he went through a lot of mental changes. And during his lifetime, he disinherited Elizabeth and her older sister Mary from the throne for reasons I'm not going to get too deep into. But in the end, before he died, he decided to put both of his daughters back into the line of succession after his son, of course, because back then, I think now, I'm not sure, but boys, they were the ones, men, they inherited the throne first, and usually it was the oldest. And then from there, it was the youngest son, and then it went to the daughters or the women. And so their little brother, he was first in the line of succession. And then Elizabeth's older sister, Mary, was next, and then Elizabeth. So she was third on the down the line. So when little Edward got sick, they had to start talking about who's inheriting the throne. But instead of it being his older sister Mary, like his father requested, Edward, he decided he wanted to make some revisions to the line of succession. And whether that was under the influence of being sick or having the influence of courtiers in his ears telling him what to do so that they can have their own financial political gain is up for debate. I'm gonna put my betting chips on yes, he was influenced by these adults. He was 15 and he was sick, but you know, we weren't there, obviously. But he made the decision to disregard Mary, his older sister, being next in the line of succession. Every so often when he was out of it and dying, he would come to and he would make a revision. And then the last time that he came to, he decided to make his cousin his heir, and her name was Lady Jane Grey. I'm not going to get into the whole family tree and bloodlines and all that. All I will say is that Mary and Elizabeth were much closer to the line of succession than his cousin Jane was. And so this was a complete slap in the face for Elizabeth's older sister, Mary. She was pissed. And you're probably wondering, okay, Laurie, what does this have to do with Elizabeth and Robert Dudley? Well, Robert's family, they were involved with this whole coup, I guess you could say, of making Lady Jane Grey the heir instead of Mary. And this is because Robert's brother Guilford, he married Lady Jane Grey, and obviously this would make him king consort, and this would give the Dudleys even more exponential power and influence. So this was strategic, it was, and some historians will say, well, Robert's family, they just were following what their monarch told them to do, and okay, that's fine, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend like they didn't have everything to gain from this situation, because they did. King consort isn't the same as like the king, but I mean, they're going to have some say in political power over what happens in this country. And so I would be very surprised if Robert Dudley's father and brother didn't have some type of influence over the young king when he was on his deathbed to make Jane his heir. When Elizabeth's sister Mary caught wind of this, she said, now wait a minute now. I'm supposed to inherit the throne. I don't know what y'all fools are doing, but I'm gonna take my throne back. Yep, that's mine. And so after Mary quickly gathered a military force, she successfully claimed the throne back. And then for the Dudleys' involvement, she sentenced both Robert, his brother Guilford, and I think a couple other brothers, as well as their father and Lady Jane Grey, to prison in the Tower of London, and then she also sentenced them all to death. And when all of this happened, when shit hit the fan, everybody else who was involved in this plot, if you will, to make Lady Jane the successor instead of Mary, all of those people, those courtiers, they just backed up. They were like, hey, I had nothing to do with this, Mary, okay? I had your back from day one. I'm your day one, Mary, okay? Off with their head. What happened was the Dudleys, Robert's family, they became the scapegoats of the whole Jane debacle. So this isn't really a good addition to Robert's family past. He's already had his grandpappy do some crazy stuff underneath of Henry VII. And then now you have his father and his brother being involved with, some more shenanigans underneath an entirely different reign under the Tudors. But in the end, on February 12th in 1535, Mary had Lady Jane Grey executed after having only been queen for, I believe it was like 10 days. Yeah, she didn't even have a chance to pass a law, gift some land, some type. She didn't have time to do nothing. And in addition to executing Jane, Mary also had Robert's father executed and his brother Guilford, who was the brother that married Jane. But fortunately for Robert and his other brothers, they were released from prison. However, their reputations were completely tarnished. And so he had to spend quite some time underneath of Mary's reign, pretty much bootlicking, if you will. Like, he had to show that he was this loyal subject, like the rest of the people who weren't involved with this whole coup. What's interesting about Queen Mary, Elizabeth's sister, is that she was an intense queen, for lack of a better word. There's a reason why she has the nickname Bloody Mary, if you have heard of it. She also imprisoned her sister Elizabeth, and not for the same reasons, of course, as she had imprisoned Robert Dudley, but more so because she was concerned that her sister would also try to usurp the throne. The other thing is that their father left an extremely fractured England when he died, and it wasn't resolved underneath of his little son's, reign. I mean, he was a 15-year-old boy. And so Mary was inheriting a country that was fractured between Protestants and Catholics, because even though Henry broke from Rome and he established the Church of England, he still had like a couple of toes in the Catholic pool. He wasn't like fully devoted to the whole Protestant thing. And so there was a lot of confusion and conflict and opposing sides. And so the Catholics, they wanted a Catholic monarch. The Protestants, they wanted a Protestant monarch. Well, Elizabeth's sister, Mary, she was Catholic. Everybody knew she was Catholic. And Elizabeth, she was the Protestant princess. Mary knew that she had enemies who were Protestant that wanted to live underneath of a Protestant monarch. And that was the other threat that Elizabeth posed against her. The other issue was that Mary accused Elizabeth of being part of a rebellion that was meant to overthrow her, even though Elizabeth, she was like, I swear, I plead the fifth, I had nothing to do with that. Okay, I support you entirely. Because of all of these issues and concerns and speculations, Mary had Elizabeth imprisoned in the Tower of London as well. I can't say I blame Mary. You know, this is a very cutthroat period in history, and sisters and brothers and cousins were getting over on each other and killing each other for thrones and power. And I can't say that I blame her for imprisoning her sister. But at the same time, I sympathize with Elizabeth. You know, she's a teenager at this point. She's very young. And this is a very terrifying period, you know, in her life. And this is something that her and Robert would share. This shared experience would cement their relationship even more, because this was a dark time where there was uncertainty around their lives. The combination of being childhood friends and being imprisoned under her older sister's reign really had an impact on their relationship. But when her sister Mary died in 1558 at 14 years old with no child, Elizabeth ascended the throne. Because her sister did not have any children, she didn't have any heirs, Elizabeth was next in the line of succession. And the moment that Elizabeth claimed her crown, there was Robert Dudley, right there at her feet, ready and waiting. He was like, I'm ready, baby, I'm ready. What you got for me? You got some titles, you know, you got some stuff you want me to do. I'm here for you, baby, I got your back. And Elizabeth, she immediately rewarded him with a title that was called the Master of Horse. And this is exactly what it sounds like. He maintained the horses and transportation and whatnot. Don't be fooled by the title of this position. You know, he's not just some joker fooling around with horses. Well, I guess he is, but this was a high up position at court. And so a lot of people did not like this. They have not forgotten the whole situation with Lady Jane Grey and his grandpappy under Henry VII. They did not trust him. They felt like Robert was all about Robert and he wasn't completely devoted to Elizabeth, which I think is unfair. I don't think it's fair to make the child suffer for the sins of the father or the grandfather or the great-great-great-grandpappy. Let this man prove himself on his own. And that's what Elizabeth wanted to do. She wanted to give him the opportunity to prove his value and his loyalty on his own. And that wasn't the only title that Elizabeth gave him. A year into her reign, Elizabeth also appointed Robert a member of the Garter, which is a very prestigious appointment that can only be granted by a sovereign. And it's like a very limited amount of people per year. I think it's like 25 people or maybe not per year. I don't know. If you know about the Garter, feel free to talk about it in the comments, but it's very close-knit, tight, you know, hard to get in, very bougie, if you will. And again, a lot of people at court did not like this. They thought that Elizabeth lost her damn mind giving him this title, but she didn't care. And despite all of the rumors and the gossip, Elizabeth loved Robert, and everyone at court knew this. And she actually had a pet name for him, and it was Bonnie Sweet Robin. That was her name for him, which, ew. The rumors about their relationship even made their way to foreign courts. People felt like there was something more than just this flirtatious back and forth, you know, completely platonic relationship. People thought there was more than that, and it made its way to other foreign courts. That is how much of a connection, an outward display of affection that they had. However, Elizabeth always said that their relationship never led to, you know, they never smashed, is what she said. But some people at court did not believe this. In fact, in the summer of 1562, Robert and Elizabeth spent several days together alone, ignoring their responsibilities, their obligations, everything, girl, everything. And as a queen who's in charge of a kingdom, that's something. That's what I'm gonna say. That's something else right there. But Elizabeth still insisted that their relationship was strictly, completely above board, as she says. As above board as she claims it was, they always flirted publicly, back and forth. And People have wondered, why she felt this connection towards Robert, why she fell in love with this man. And some historians have some theories as to why their relationship really blossomed the way it did. Some historians believe that Robert had this ability to treat her like this beautiful woman while also treating her as his sovereign, a woman who has power. Even though Elizabeth was a queen and one of the best monarchs that England has ever seen, a lot of people did not respect Elizabeth because she didn't have something that swung between her legs. When she inherited her throne, she had a lot to prove, which is really messed up, but it is what it is. That's the way people thought back then. Even though her little brother barely did anything and he was 15, when he died, she still had to work harder to show her subjects and her advisors, her council, that she was about that life, that she could handle this appointment regardless of being a woman or a man. And so having this man treat her with the respect that was indicative of her title and also treat her as this beautiful, lovely woman, it really had an impact on the way she saw Robert. That's at least, a theory that I've come across by some historians as to why their relationship formed the way that it did. But regardless of why or how their relationship blossomed into what it was, the closer Robert got to Elizabeth, the more enemies he acquired. And his family's tainted history, it just lingered like a shadow over him for several years, with courtiers even suspecting him of using Elizabeth for his own ambition. But Elizabeth, she always defended her sweet Bonnie Robin. But their love could never blossom into a full-on relationship. And that is because Robert was married. Yes, you heard right. He was married. In fact, he was married when they were locked up in the Tower of London. So even before Elizabeth inherited her throne. This entire time that Robert spent with Elizabeth, day in and day out, flirting, being her confidant, her emotional lover. Robert was married to a woman named Amy Robsart. Robert and Amy got married when they were both 18 years old. And at some point in their marriage, Amy contracted breast cancer and she became extremely ill. And the amount of time Robert was spending with Elizabeth instead of his sick wife, it made people side-eye him a little bit, rightfully so. It was a little weird. And so you got this sick wife that is suffering from breast cancer all by herself, and you're over here at court flirting with the queen. I can only imagine how this poor young woman felt. But shit really hit the fan when Amy died under very suspicious circumstances on September 8th in 1560. She was found dead at the bottom of the staircase in their home with a broken neck. What's that all about? And before Amy died, rumors were already spreading that Robert was planning to either kill his wife to make room to marry Elizabeth, or he was planning on annulling his marriage from her. So when Amy died under these very strange circumstances, an official inquest was conducted, and in the end it was decided that Robert was completely innocent and he had nothing to do with it. However, just like today, public opinion plays a huge role on people's lives. And so even though the law decided that he was innocent, the public decided, something ain't right in the buttermilk. This is a little strange. And because of this, Elizabeth had to separate herself away from Robert for quite some time. She wanted nothing to do with this because people also started to look at Elizabeth a little funny because they started to wonder, well, did she have something to do with Amy's death? Did she? It wasn't until recent years that medical experts found that someone in the advanced stages of breast cancer, they can actually experience a spontaneous fracture of the spine. But even if this was common information during Elizabeth's time, she couldn't marry him. It was just too scandalous. Had she died in a less suspicious way, then yeah, Elizabeth, she could have humored the marriage, but this kind of messed things up a little bit for them. Once suspicions of Robert's involvement in his wife's death began to subside, he was able to successfully come out of it on the other end. Despite this unfortunate event, Elizabeth allowed Robert to court her for about a decade. He was a serious contender for Elizabeth's hand in marriage for quite some time. Elizabeth and Robert, they had a very strange relationship. So here's an example of like how weird their relationship was. When Robert proposed to Elizabeth on Christmas Day in 1565, Elizabeth turned him down and he was pissed, and so he stormed out of the court very furious. But Elizabeth wasn't having it. No, Elizabeth said, "You're gonna bring your ass back here. Okay, I don't care how pissed off you are. Okay, you're gonna come back to court ASAP, and you're never gonna leave again unless I tell you to." Imagine that. You just proposed to this woman that you love for years and she turns you down. Okay, fine. But then you walk away because you need some time, and she's like, "You get no time. I'm not gonna marry you, but you're gonna bring your ass right back here and you're gonna sit next to me and you're just gonna brood, okay, in the corner in my presence." Like, give the man some time to like mourn the death of the idea of him marrying you, lady. Like, Jesus Christ. It's just a weird relationship. Their whole relationship, for the most part, was full of just misunderstanding after misunderstanding, makeups to breakups after another, and it continued like this literally up until the day that one of them died. But despite all of this, they truly did love each other. As her favorite, Robert received a lot of fancy gifts from Elizabeth, and on 4 occasions, she visited his home, Kenilworth Castle. Elizabeth, as queen, she would visit her courtiers, her subjects' homes every so often. And she actually visited Robert's home on 4 different occasions at Kenilworth Castle. These weren't normal home visits. This isn't like the equivalent of your homegirl stopping by, for some tea. This is intense because it's not just Elizabeth coming maybe with a friend or a couple folks. This is a whole gang of people. I'm talking about like 200 plus deep. That's what it's like when a monarch comes to visit your home. And so what that means is that you got to shell out that cash to be able to afford to entertain these people, to feed these people, to give them drinks, to house them, all of the above. They're bringing their horses. You got to have horse feed and somebody scooping the horse shit. This is a lot of time and money. And she came to his house 4 times. If I saw this woman coming up over the hill to my home, I'd be like, "Miss Ma'am, you might as well turn around and take that horse right back where you came from. No, thank you. All 500 of you can go right back up that hill." But I would also be dead for saying that. So that's why I don't live during this period. I wouldn't have survived. So on one of Elizabeth's visits to Robert's home in 1575, she stayed there for a whopping 19 days. Could you imagine just, oh my God, the stress of dealing with these people and housing them for 19 days? Jesus Christ. And this was the longest amount of time that she had ever spent at any of her subjects' home. Any of them. Here's another story for you guys. When Elizabeth was 29, she almost died from smallpox. And within just a few days of running a fever, she went into a coma. 2 days later, she woke up, but she would continue to drift in and out of consciousness. And during this time, her Privy Council, they had to figure out what they were going to do if she died, because she didn't have any kids, she wasn't married, and she didn't have a designated heir. And without a designated heir, your kingdom can go into civil war and just create a bunch of chaos. And so they had to figure out what they were gonna do if she died. One of the times Elizabeth came to while she was out, she told her council to appoint Robert as the Lord Protector of England should she die. And this position is essentially the interim ruler until they find an heir to replace Elizabeth after she dies. So she loved this man so much that she was willing to make him in charge of all these people for a time. Now, whether or not this has to do with her being sick and being kind of out of it, who knows? I like to think that when you're in those situations that it shows how you truly feel. Kind of like when you're drunk, your true feelings and emotions start to come out.
I love scotch. I love scotch. Scotch is scotch. Here it goes down into my belly.
That sort of thing. A lot of truth telling. When she told her council that she wanted Robert to be the Lord Protector, they were like, "Oh yeah, Robert, good old Bonnie Robin. Yeah, that's our boy. No problem. Yes, Lord Protector, we got you, girl. Well, write it down. William, get the paper. We gonna put this in ink right now, Your Majesty. No problem. They went back in that room. They were like, hell no. Robert, ain't no way in hell. They all decided that if Robert became the Lord Protector, civil war would break out. It just was not possible. But they let her think on her deathbed, yep, sure. Robert wasn't the only man who wanted Elizabeth's hand. When she ascended the throne, she became an even more attractive person for marriage for a lot of powerful people throughout Europe. Even during the first few weeks of her reign, she started receiving proposal offers. Elizabeth, she had to be very careful as to who she chose to marry because it's a little different for a queen versus a king because of the fact that men had a lot of power during this time. And her subjects were very concerned about her marrying a foreigner and a foreigner coming into their country and having power over their affairs. If she chose wrong, her decision could also lead to civil unrest. There's just so many possible bad turns that this woman could have made that would have led to civil unrest, and she made it through. I mean, this woman was intelligent and very strategic and very she was just boss. She was a boss, okay? There's a reason why Elizabeth is one of my favorite historic figures. She's just a woman after my own heart. And because she was so smart, she went about this whole courtship in a very strategic way. She used her availability as a tool of diplomacy. She would literally string interested suitors along for a while, and then she would use their relationship for diplomatic purposes, and then she would drop them like a hot pocket. Elizabeth did this for 20 years. And because the idea of possibly marrying this woman was just way too good to let go, a lot of these suitors, they literally fell in line and they played this dance with her for several years. One of her earliest potential suitors was Philip II, the King of Spain. Philip was initially married to her sister Mary, and he didn't marry very dirty. He literally married her, hit it and quit it, and he went back to Spain. That was how he did her sister. And Elizabeth knew this, and she did not want that to happen to her. So she straight up told Philip, look, I think we'd be better as friends. You know, I'm sorry. I think we have a lot to gain out of a friendship. You know, what do you say? And, you know, she didn't want to piss Philip off, you know, but at the same time, she did not want to marry him. And so in the end, that's what happened. They did not stay friends, but that's another story for another time. There was also Prince Eric of Sweden, who wrote her steamy love letters in Latin, confessing his undying love for her, a woman that he barely knew. There was also Philip's cousin, the Archduke Charles of Austria. Yes, his cousin went for the same woman. She negotiated marriage with this specific guy for a few years. At this point, Elizabeth had a lot of suitors coming in and out of the court, and this ended up leading to some beefs between suitors.
Got beef, got steak hoe, got cheese.
Eric of Sweden's envoys and the Archduke Charles of Austria's envoys, they started beefing and threatening to kill each other. And I'm sitting here thinking like, sirs, you're not even the ones marrying this woman. You're representing the men that want to marry her. And y'all are willing to die over this? Are you crazy? But I guess they went hard. And so Elizabeth had to go out of her way to make it so that these fools would not cross paths when they would come to court to, you know, represent their monarchs or their people to propose marriage to Elizabeth. There was also the Duke of Anjou, and there was also Sir William Pickering. I mean, the list goes on and on. She had a ridiculous list of suitors. There were some men who caught her fancy from time to time, like Sir Pickering. That was a guy she was kind of interested in for a little bit, but it was very short. But nobody caught her fancy like her dear bonny sweet Robin. From the time that Elizabeth ascended to the throne, they expected her to marry and have kids. It was just what she did to ensure stability in the land. But when Elizabeth reached her 40s, that's when they had to come to the realization like, okay, this is not gonna happen. Elizabeth's resolution to this whole situation, because she knew that marrying someone could potentially lead to a very disastrous effect for her and or her country, she made the decision to become a virgin for the rest of her life. She would marry no one. and that included her sweet Robert Dudley. At first, very few people believed that Elizabeth would actually stick to this promise because it was just too out there to them, but she did. Well, I mean, she never married. As far as whether or not she ever had sex, I mean, I don't know. Who knows? You know, she claims she never did. She says she never did. So I guess we just have to take her word for it. I mentioned that Elizabeth and Robert's relationship had many ups and downs. Well, something would happen that would forever change the course of their relationship up until the day they died. And that was when Robert decided to marry a woman named Lettice Knowles on September 21st in 1578 without Elizabeth's knowledge. This infuriated Elizabeth for several reasons. First of all, Lettice, she was a distant relative of hers. She was a bit younger, and they said that she was kind of like Elizabeth's doppelganger, the more beautiful, younger version of Elizabeth. And so she was kind of like Elizabeth's rival. She didn't like that. Elizabeth already didn't like that. At the same time, it's no surprise that Robert ended up marrying a woman that looked like the woman that he loved pretty much his whole life. It's kind of weird. Of course, I mean, if I was Lettice, I'd be kind of sus about that. I would be like, sir, I don't know if this is gonna work. I'm not gonna play second fiddle to any woman, including a queen. You know, I just wonder how this woman reacted to him proposing to her, knowing that he's been in love with this woman publicly for several years and that I look like her. That's really, really strange. I was actually kind of in that situation years ago with an ex. He ended up being with this chick that didn't look like me. I mean, nothing like me, but she had a lot of very similar qualities that I had. And he and I were friends, you know, and I was with my guy and we were like on a double date, and I'm sitting here thinking like, yeah, we're friends, everything's over with, blah blah, we've been broken up for years at this point. And then I see you bring this chick around that literally is kind of like me, but the like bootleg. She was like the thrift store version of me. It's very strange, you know, but hey, to each their own, I guess. Even though Elizabeth was no longer interested in marrying Robert at this point, she was very, very pissed. In addition to Lettice being her like younger, quote unquote, better looking doppelganger, she also liked to have control over her courtier's sexual activities. And you're probably thinking, what the hell? This is very strange. And it is. It is very, very weird. Okay. She wanted to have control over who people got married to. You know, they had to have her consent before they tied the knot. Also, if anyone had sexual affairs outside of marriage, she punished them. The punishments weren't fair, I would say. They varied from person to person. They varied from socioeconomic status. They also varied from gender. She typically would banish the offenders from court, and after a while, after she blowed off some steam, she would forgive the men usually, and she'd allow them back into court. The women, more times than not, were not allowed to return. She would hold a grudge against the women. There's a few theories that historians have created as to why Elizabeth had this reaction towards sex and marriage. Some historians think it had something to do with her father, Henry VIII, accusing her mother, Anne Boleyn, of having extramarital affairs, including incestuous acts with her brother. Yes, that is right. Anne Boleyn was accused of having sex with her brother. I don't believe it. Most people don't believe it. Some believe it has to do with her sister Mary's lackluster relationship with Philip of Spain, the guy who married her and hit it and quit it. And some people think it has to do with her childhood. When she was a little girl, it's believed she was sexually assaulted by a courtier named Thomas Seymour. And so she's had exposure to a lot of failed and miserable relationships and just unhealthy displays of what sex and healthy sexual relationships are supposed to be. Either way, we'll never know for certain as to why Elizabeth reacted this way to sexual relationships, but what we do know is that she was extremely pissed off at Lettice Knowles for marrying Robert, and she maintained a hatred for Lettice for the rest of her life. I mean, she was not letting go of this grudge at all. And then she was, of course, also pissed off at Robert, so much so that she actually publicly humiliated him. Poor Robert. She was like, if I can't have you, nobody can have you. After Robert married Lettice, his relationship with Elizabeth, it was never the same, but they still loved each other and maintained their friendship for the rest of their lives. When Robert died on September 4th in 1588, Elizabeth was completely distraught. When she learned of his death just a week after last seeing him, she locked herself up in her rooms and she refused to leave until one of her courtiers broke down the door to her room. Up until the day she died on March 24th in 1603, which was 15 years after Dudley's death, she kept the last letter her one true love sent her on her bedside in a box. Oh, that's so sad. God, it's like sweet and sad all at the same time. Anyway, there's no evidence that the two were lovers, that they actually, did the do. We do know that they did love each other and they did not try to hide the PDA. But I want to know what you guys think. Do you think that they were intimate at all at any point during all those years? Or do you think that Elizabeth was telling the truth, that their entire relationship was platonic? I personally am not really sure because I feel like that trip that they took by themselves, just getting away from everything and enjoying each other's company alone, that was kind of sus to me. I find it hard to believe that you spent days with this man that you were sexually attracted to and you're alone and y'all did nothing. Two grown folks alone. Nothing. Like that, it's hard for me to believe, but we'll never know for certain. Well, that is the story of Elizabeth and Robert Dudley. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you are interested in learning more about Elizabeth and Robert Dudley, I have included my resources in the description box below. See y'all in the next one. Bye.
Perfect.